Okay. All right. Welcome to another session. Today we're going to be talking about Beginner's Guide to View Template and Filters. Unfortunately, for the last couple of weeks, we couldn't get this focus group because what happened is that and that was causing, like this laptop is using Wi-Fi, and the unfortunate part about it is that if you don't have Wi-Fi, it makes it very, very difficult. So, yeah. So I apologize. All right. So let's go to the next slide. What is View Template? Okay. So if you never worked with Revit before, or this is the first time you're using it, a View Template is basically, you want to have a consistent view from one view to another. So what View Template does is that it allows you to save that setting and then apply it to multiple views. So it's a good way if you are working with lots of projects, with like massive project with similar view, and you want to have the same settings. So View Template, it becomes very, very good. Why we use View Template is basically you want to keep it consistent. So you do not want to spend time configuring one view and then go to the next view, configure it, and then if let's say oh shoot, I forgot something here, and then you have to go back and reconfigure it. So that's time wasted. So rather than doing that, we use View Template. And the other thing is that sometimes for View Template, we want to prevent people. Let's say if they're the beginner at Revit and they don't know or they don't understand how the whole system's set up, we typically place a View Template just to prevent other users from actually manipulate it. Okay. What are filters? Filters is basically, once you get into the nitty-gritty, I'm pretty sure you guys know how to use the visibility in graphics, correct? All you do is just VG or VV, and then you have like a whole set of stuff. Now, in between, there's called the Revit Filters. It's basically a word to itself, right? You could get very, very complicated. So what it does is that if you have certain conditions that you want to meet, and it's not based on certain object categories, it's only like if you wanted to have certain, let's say, wall, doors, windows, like all those to have the same color, you can do that with filters. Normally, if you want to do it with, let's say, the other method, it becomes very, very difficult. Now, why do we use View Templates? It's basically just give user a graphical controller rather than faking. I know in the past what people would use in the past is they don't use filters, they just use faking. All right, so they just draw a bunch of stuff in there. I was like saying, no, don't do this, right? It becomes cumbersome. So use filter, because filter has a way to kind of manipulate the model itself. Now, one thing that I should always tell user to avoid is that when you go right-clicking, you want to hide that object, you just say hide by element, okay? This should be avoided at all costs, because what happened is that if you do that, sometimes the next person coming in is saying that, oh, I'm missing an object here, but it shows up in another view. You kind of get them to say, okay, my object disappears. And sometimes what they did is that they just place another object on top of that. It becomes an issue. Now, the only time I accept that is if you create a dependent view. What I mean by that is that if you have a parent view and then you're doing, like, let's say SI, site instruction, and you want to hide a certain object because the view is too big, you want to shrink it down, and sometimes it has all this objects that's like surrounding that little view. So rather than using filters and stuff like that, then you can use that hide by element. So just to hide that stuff, but the overall view will not hide that object, it's only that dependent view. So when you're doing SIs, like site instruction, RFIs, like request for information, yes, you can do it. Okay. Use override in graphics. When you right-click on this override graphics in view, sometimes that will override basically a lot of the like the whatever the filters or the visibility graphics. Typically, I would avoid doing it, because if you right-click override it, and then when you try to capture it using a template, it will not take that settings along with it. So if you use the override graphics, like the one down below, it's only for that specific view. Okay, so I just say avoid that as much as possible. I would only use like override graphics in a view if you are using AutoCAD links. You link it in and you want to make it like black, you want to make it like other color or grayscale, then you can do that override. That's the only thing I find it useful if you are using the override graphics in view, because AutoCAD, if you go inside the menu bar and you try to change all the settings, it's a very, very tedious process. I recommend it, so I usually use the override graphics for all the CAD stuff. Now, something to keep in mind, when you're creating a filters, there's a setting in there. Let's say, for example, you choose all your objects category, right? And when you click on filter by, the only thing that shows up is Workset, okay? If you choose all the objects and the objects that's not in there, Workset's always going to be the one that shows up. Now, this is very useful. Later on, I'm going to demonstrate how it's done so that you guys can actually use it for your project. All right, moving on. There's something that's often missed. If you are doing the visibility graphics, sometimes what tends to get missed out is the detail level. So what happens is that if you are, let's say, using, you're creating a project where you want the detail to be fine detail, so it shows all the details, element, and stuff like that. But when you look at walls, it's too detailed. It has too much layer. So what this does is that the detail level, you can actually switch your wall to be a coarse level, but at the same time, all the views are going to have fine detail. So it's a good way if you are doing a lot of this settings. You can actually manipulate each of those categories based on what level of details you want. Too often I saw a lot of drawings like 1/8 scale or 1 to 100 scale. They shows like really, really like fine detail for a wall. At showing up at that large scale, it just doesn't make sense because it makes your wall looks like a blob basically. So what I typically do in that scenario is that I change the wall not by view and then set it to coarse, so that way the wall always show coarse. It's just 2 line rather than showing like all the layers individually. Something that a lot of people never looked, if sometimes in my previous job, what I did is that when I set everything halftone, and when you get printed out, it's really, really light. Okay, so if you want to bump up the level of like halftone, here's how you do it: is that you go to additional settings, go to halftone. By default, it's 50%, but if you want to crank it up like 60, 70%, this is how I would pretty much do it. All right, let's start with the demo. Any questions so far? Yeah, since there's only 2 of you guys, so you guys can just jump in and ask me any question. So I'm just trying to make this thing as interactive as much as possible. So I'm just going to open up Revit 2017 because that's what I'm using. So I'm just going to use one of the existing projects just to show you guys what you could do with view templates. And then the other thing I'm going to show you guys is how to use filters, like change, let's say if you're doing code, for example, you want to know if this wall is 2 hours, that wall is 1 hour, etc., etc. This is how you do it. All right, so I'm just going to use one of my old project I've worked on. So it's on desktop. This is why, like, when you're doing it on server, there's a chance that it could get a hiccup. So I'd rather just do it on. Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, in the future I'll probably do another session on like can you create complicated machineries inside Revit, which you can. I've done it, I tested, and it works. Okay. When you first start out Revit, so the first thing you want to do inside a view template, it's pretty straightforward. So if you never create a view template, it's pretty easy. Let's say I'm going to duplicate this and call it something. Let's say test. Now within this view template, what I want to do is that I want a certain look to this so that it looks really nice and clean. So the first thing I would do is that inside this view, you want certain objects to be turned off. So what I typically like to do in here is that, let's say you create a view, I would just say hide categories all the time. Do not hide by element, because if you hide by element, it doesn't work. Okay, so for Revit links, I'm just going to turn on certain things that I want to see. Okay, right now I have that, and then if you want to, let's say, hide this, all you have to do is just go right, hide this by category. So I just basically hide all that stuff. Now, reference plate, I know that some people like to turn it off. Some people say, just leave it on because it will not print. Now, you have to be careful, because if you ever export this out, let's say you're giving this to a consultant, if you don't hide that reference plane, it's going to show up in AutoCAD. So most of the time in this particular view, a good practice I always do is that just hide anything anyways, even though it's not printed in Revit, but you just have to make sure that when you export stuff out, it's always turned off. So it's a good practice. I usually recommend that. So any other, let's say, view, for instance, let's say you have scope box, for instance, right? I usually turn them off. Now you have this line. So what you do here is that you go to areas and just look at it and see what they are. So this one is particular a room, so I just go to R for room, and I would turn off this to interior. Okay, so it shows up like that, so it's a very nice clean drawings. Now sometimes you would notice that your drawing has this really weird line right there. How I turn off is I go into VV, go to floor, and I turn off the interior slab edge. Same as roof, okay? Because what happens is that sometimes it will show you like just a line. It's very annoying, so this is a good way to just turn that interior edge off. So once you've done that, when you select this particular object, you notice that that line disappears. Because if you don't turn that off, the AutoCAD guys is gonna complain to you saying that what's that extra line doing there? Okay, so the whole idea is basically just to minimize as much line as possible. So once you have the settings all set up like this, okay, the next thing you're going to do is you're going to go right click on here and say create view template from view. Okay, once you have all this thing set up, everything's nice, just say create the view from template. Call this, I'm just going to call this test plan. Okay. So here I have a test plan. Everything looks good. Everything's set up, and hit OK. Now what I'm going to do is that if I want to create the next level, let's say I'm going to duplicate this. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is that once you hit this level, all I can do here is click on the view template and change it to test plan, right? And then when you hit OK, what it does is that it's going to take the previous settings and it's going to apply to this. So it makes it a little bit easier if you ever want to do this control. Okay, so that's kind of like how view template works. Now you could get very, very deep. That's for example. Now the problem with some of this view template is that it has its own scale. So if you want to use it for multiple scale, let's say for example this particular view you want it to be 1/16, and in the other view you want to be some other one, but the settings are all the same, then I would check this off. Okay, if you check it off, it means that that view template can be applied for multiple scale, but all the settings are going to be the same. Okay, and when you hit OK, now what this does is that this could be, let's say, a 1/4 inch, and then let's say I'm gonna duplicate this. Let's say I'm going to duplicate this and change it to 1/2 inch. Let's say this one I'm going to go 1/2 inch. If I select that and put the test, that scale will not get affected. It's only the other settings get affected. Okay, so that's how you do it for multiple views. I know that when you actually work on existing project, you will see people start creating multiple scale for different variations. It's a good idea, yes, it's good, but at the same time, if you want to have the same settings for your overall plan versus your the partial plans, let's say the blown up plans, if they're sharing the same thing, why not just use one template, but just change the scale and saying that do not change the scale. And once you apply that, you only have one template to deal with. Because I know that a lot of people just simply just duplicate templates and stuff like that. It's fine, you can do it, but just make sure you just be aware of this. All right. Now, the other thing you could do inside a template, you could actually tell it to go which location. Let's say, for example, you want that drawing to be in a certain set, right? So if you apply that view template, you can actually tell it to go to, let's say, a sheet view, right? So when I hit apply, what this does is that all that view that have that, it's going to go down to the next page. So your template, sometimes you say, oh, where's my view and where did it go, right? Always double check, because they have a lot of stuff in here that you can check on and off. Now, a couple of things you want to check off every time is that if you are using consultant drawings and you want to reference to their view, something to keep in mind is that, okay, let's say, for example, Tower B, I have one called linked view, right? You kind of have to be careful, because sometimes if you are on level 2 and you want to show up on level 2, then it's going to be different than, than that. So you kind of have to make sure this thing gets turned off, okay? Because your link view, you want to display on different levels, and sometimes when you receive a consultant file, yeah, make sure this thing's check off. Workset, I'll just leave it alone. Like all the other stuff, just keep it the same. And the other thing is that view range. View range is very tricky, because by default, you can say it's 4 feet. This one I would just say -1, -1. Now, in certain cases, you're going to have like a double height scenario where one height is going to be different than the other. So this is where I kind of tell people is like, turn it off if you want to, right? So that each of those particular views that you're working on has its own setting. But for now, I'm just going to keep it simple, just keep everything the same, okay? And say okay. Now, when you go to VV, you notice that all this stuff got grayed out, right? So every time when you notice that there's a grayed out, it's because it's controlled through the template. I check off the Revit links. Now you notice that I could go in here and change my file. So I could say, okay, this is no longer level 1, so this is going to be level 3. So I could just go in here and hit apply, and there we go. Now, the one thing interesting about the links is that all links, you can call up any levels you want. So this is why I like the link version, because it doesn't have to be on level 1. You can actually show it to like level 20 at this particular file. So it has its own independent view. But just keep in mind when you're doing a lot of this template, make sure that the link is always check off, or else if you apply it, all the views are going to have the same level 1. So just be careful, okay? So yeah, sometimes you have to just keep in mind with this. Any questions so far with this? That's a kind of like a very generic view template. It's nothing magical about it. One thing I always do when I do my plan is that I always have one for each stage of the project. So for this one, if you're doing design development or construction documentation, so I always add like, this one I'm just gonna go CD, you could say overall plan. Trying to keep it very generic, because I always see people saying, okay, overall parking 150, scale. They have like various scale for different template, and what happens is that the list gets longer and longer and longer, and it's not very feasible. And most of the time what people would do is that they get confused with all this different types of view templates. So most of the time I just try to keep it like to the minimum as much as possible, and also be excuse me, be very descriptive. So let's say, for example, if it's key plan, make sure it's key plan. And if you have like multiple key plans for like various things, just ask the peers around you and saying, do you need this view template? Because sometimes a lot of view templates can slow you down, because you have to scroll through which one is the right one, which one's the wrong one. In most cases, if I can't find the view I want, I just recreate from scratch, or the existing view that's already been set up, right? Then just create a new one and then just purge the other one as well. Okay, now something to keep in mind. Each of this view, if you click on, let's say, floor plan, there's one called the edit type. You notice that here, you could also apply view template to this. Okay, you could apply view template. I normally would set to none. Okay, I know in some offices they would choose to set it to a specific view template so that whenever user create a new view, it's always going to be applying the same thing. It's a good idea and it's also bad. Okay, good idea is that you keep control of view. The bad idea is that if I want to modify it or like do like, let's say, tasks where I want certain view to look differently than the other, you constantly have to turn off that view template. Okay, it becomes annoying. So I prefer to keep it none because I sometimes like to configure it myself for the view just to make sure that I get the stuff that I wanted. In most cases, if you're afraid that your user is going to screw it up, yeah, just put them in, okay, so they don't screw it up. But just keep in mind, because sometimes people ask me a question saying why the view is all grayed out. Yeah, it's because someone already applied that view template. All right, for filters. Filters is a very interesting thing because it's a very, very sophisticated settings. So in this particular one, let's go level 2. Okay, so let's say I have this view. I should apply. Let's say apply view template. Let's say test plan. Oh, it was deleted. Oh, great. Okay, I should duplicate this because what happened is that the central model has something. Okay, so let's say here I want to apply view template. Now, when you hit apply view template, it's there's a difference. Okay, so if you click on, where am I? Okay, here we go. So here you can click on this and say set it to that view template, or you could go right click, apply view template. There's a differences between one of them. One of them is going to be absolute, right? So if you click on the view template, it's going to be an absolute right there. This one, when you click apply view template, it's only going to be set to that particular view, but it's not going to have a view template. Okay, just that's the difference, because when you right click on it, apply view template properties, it's just basically it's going to set it to that particular view template, but it's going to default it to none. Whereas if you click on this and you check on that, it's going to have the same thing. Okay, in this particular view, let's assume that I want to keep all my units here all gray, okay, half tone. How would you do it? So you could go in and you could say, okay, if all my walls and columns and stuff like that I want to half tone. But the unfortunate thing about that is if you do that, it's going to be all the categories regardless of what workset they're on. So in this particular case, I choose the workset for this as 6.0, which is kind of like the interior furniture. I already changed that. So all I have to do is just create a filter. So in this particular filter, I'm just going to add a filter. Create new. So I'm gonna call this workset, let's say furniture, fern, right? So what I'm gonna do is that check all, and workset equals, you could say pick this particular one, and when you hit apply, now what you have is that you have a workset called fern, and in here you can say I'm gonna go half tone, and when you hit half tone, what it does is that all that stuff is gonna get grayed out. Okay, yeah, you can't really see it, but it's there. So right now I should just change my halftone setting. Right now I have it 60%. Let's assume that it's 25%. Okay, it's deleted. Yeah, whatever. But that, you know the case, right? If you change the halftone, that's how you do it for workset. Okay, what if you want to do? Let's say you want to separate the fire rated from non-fire rated. So how do you do that? So here I'm just gonna choose a very simple filter. Okay, I'm gonna create a filter that's gonna be very, very simple. I'm gonna create one called fire rated. Let's say this is 1 hour. So in here I want my wall my door, okay, filter by fire rating, and then you can say equal, 1 hour, 2 hours, or you could say there is one called equal, do not equal, it's greater than, less than, depending on which one. Most cases, if you want to keep it very blunt, equal is fine. But the only problem with equal is that if someone accidentally placed in the wrong value, let's say for example, rather than 1 HR, they put in 1 underscore HR, then you have a problem. So what most of the time I do is that contain. Okay, I say contain, let's say anything with 1, hit apply, and then here I can go in fire rated F, okay, and this is where it gets very, very fun, right? So here I could say, okay, for this one, make it 6, like give it like a really, really like red, and then same thing as line, I usually say 6, just make it the same and say, there we go. And then if you want, you could say pattern, give it a color. I usually just give it a color and say solid. So if you're doing like a fire rated plan and stuff like that, that's a QA QC kind of a method, and this becomes a very important kind of to just check and see which wall actually makes sense. Okay, so those are kind of like how I would use filter, right? There's other stuff you could use with filters. One thing I would do is that with filters, if you have a room that has bigger or less than certain area, you can do that. So let's assume that here I'm just going to say room larger than, let's say, 1,000 square feet, for instance. So what you're going to do is that you go to room, let's see if room, and you can say area is greater than 1,000. Okay, so in here what you can do is that you got room greater than 1,000 square feet, and this is where you're going to say my pattern, give me a pink and give me solid fill. And there we go. So you could do a lot with filters. So you could say I want areas, and also it does a lot of things as well. You could do it in 3D. So if you want to show what's solid, what's glass, that's another. Let's say for example in 3D, I want to show all my glass. Okay, so in here what I can do is that I would create a filter. Let's say glass, let's say facade glass. Okay, so in here what I would do is that I would choose my wall, my window, I would choose door, and I would use curtain panel, right, because that's pretty much it. Now in here what I would do is that I would choose a very out of the box configuration. So you always choose the one called the type, right? Type comments, type mark, type name. Well, type name is just itself. So I usually use the type comments, or you can use description. Anything. Let's use description. It's much easier. Okay, so here I could say glass. Where is it? Facade. Glass. Okay. For here, I would just say all the patterns. Again, I'm just going to choose blue, and then just use a solid fill. Okay. Yeah, it's going to give me this really cookie. There we go. Yeah, the reason why some of them are actually blue is because when you click on this thing, and when you hit description, say description, you notice that in here, if I say glass, right, or solid, yeah, it's gonna do that constantly. I should duplicate some of this view. Yeah, I should do that. Let's duplicate that just in case.
So what did you put as the rule? Description.
Description
Equals to something.
Yeah, equals to glass.
Equals to glass.
Yeah, because what happened is that each of this object, if you click on, let's say for example, this particular object, right? If you edit the type, you notice that in Revit, it has this identity data description blue, right? Here I'm just going to go glass, right? When you hit apply, anything with the glass in nomenclature, it's going to apply the same materials as the other stuff. So what it would do is that if you want to say this door, that wall, and many other walls, you want to have the same value, then what the filter will do is that it allows you to basically grab multiple conditions where you tell it to be a curtain wall, a door, a wall, and a window. Now, description is a common parameters that applies to multiple categories. So, description, type names, type mark is a very common one. So once you have all of them in common, then what filter would do is that it takes those information and say, highlight that for me. So usually I do this a lot when I'm doing a lot of the panel calculations and stuff like that. I want to highlight what is this versus what is that, so I get the visual thing. Any questions so far? Sounds pretty simple, or?
So, when do you use the workset and when do you use the filter? I didn't get the
Oh, okay.
difference.
Okay. Filter is basically if you want an object and you want to get very, very nitty gritty, something like that, you can do that with filter. What Workset does is that it's another layer of, let's say, I'm working on this particular workset and you want to check it out so that nobody touches that. That's how Workset works. It's more for the user, right? Now, when you put the objects in the right workset, for instance, right? Let's say, for example, here, I already put this in the proper workset. What you can do with a filter is that you can take that anything that is in that workset and then just make it all halftone or other color. Then that's how you do it. That's how you apply it. Workset is just another set of you want objects on and off, right? If you do not want to, let's say for example, you're working on a very large project and you want to have certain workset to show up and not the rest, you could say all of this, do not turn it on and only turn on that particular workset. So you don't open the whole model, you just only open up that small model. So this is why I'm always very, very adamant that people, if you're working on larger projects, always put in a workset, because when the project gets too big, sometimes you run out of memory very fast. So the only way you could do it is open up your model partially so you don't open up everything. So.
And how do you define a new workset?
Oh, okay. How do you define a workset? So all you have to do is just click on this little button here. Okay. Now this is where you can say, okay, I want a new workset. Okay, you can call it whatever. Now this button is interesting because it's visible in all view, right? If you check it off, means that it's not going to show up in all the views. By default, it's going to be turned off. Now, one thing to keep in mind, worksets can be very, very useful because if you have a consultant that sent you a link and you want to turn off their model and except for certain workset, you can tell it to basically tell them this is the workset I'm going to be working on. So what you could do in here is that, okay, this is their workset. Let's assume that they have a workset called NWV, whatever their workset. If you put it the same name as their workset, and then you say you do not want to turn on in your workset, in your particular central file, you can automatically turn it off, right? So what I'm going to do here is that, okay, for example, here I don't think I have any consultant. Maybe I should create another one so that I'll show you what I'm talking about, because it's kind of hard to display this because since I already have that. Maybe I should try the dialog version so that they have a workset. I'm going to link their model into mine, and then I'm going to create my own workset, and just to say I want only to show this, and then do not show the other. You could do that with workset. So as long as you have the same name, and then in your particular central file, you have it turned off, right? Every time when you send them their model into yours, anything workset, if it's have the same name, it will automatically shut that off. So that's a good way for Workset. I'm not sure if everybody talks about this. I kind of noticed this when I was like working with larger and more complicated files, is that if you have a Workset named the same as the consultant's one, and you put it in yours, and then you have it shut off, anything that they sent you is always going to be turned off. So very interesting. Okay, so here I'm just gonna create a new project, just a very simple one, construction. Okay, I'm gonna link in the dialog here. I'm just gonna create my own. Let's say I'm gonna save project. Sure, I'm just gonna save it here. Now I'm gonna go into collaborate and say collaborate. It's gonna say collaborate within the network. Okay, so now I have my workset, 2 worksets. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to insert the dialog version. So I'm going to put it on my desktop project. This one, links, Revit, and then this is the dialog version. By default, when you link their model in, it's going to show everything because you don't have that workset already set up in your particular one. You would notice that they have a lot of stuff that is like that's showing up. So one particular site, if I go to 3D, you see that their wall here, there's a whole bunch of stuff in there. So the one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go into dig deeper into their workset. So in here they have their workset. So by basic, I'm going to go custom, click on their workset and see what they have, right? So in here they have one called the not in use. Okay, just make sure you have the same name. Okay, so I'm just going to do a print screen so that I'm going to do an MS Paint. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to cancel out of this, go to my workset, okay, create a new one, make sure it's not visible in all view, okay, and just use the one called the NWV do not in use. So NWV, yeah, NVW, oops, okay, I should get out of this because this thing was just killing me. So let's do it here. New NVW, do not show up in all the view, and then you can say not in use. Yeah. So make sure that the naming it's identical, because if you're off by, let's say, a naming convention and stuff like that, sometimes this will not work. So if I say do not show up in all view, you can say no. Okay, so what happened is that you see that the wall now disappears. It's because if you have that workset put into your thing, it's going to be automatically shut off. So in here you can always check what workset they're going to be. Okay, Revit link NVWWMP, right? So in here I could do the same, go new, not visible, the Revit link Revit, NVWWMP, and when you hit OK, no, and when I go back to my 3D view, it disappears. Okay, so that's how I do filtering, right? So if you want to have consultant files and you say you do not want to show a lot of the stuff, have it the same. Make sure I always tell the users, like, if your work set is going to be named this, can you add like an acronym from the beginning? Let's say their dialog, DLG, like just add them in to all the work sets so that you know it's from dialog. So most cases I would say if you're working with multiple consultants, different people have different naming convention. This is something that have to be discussed in the beginning. so that you get this consistency who's using what, right? So if I want to grab your structural drawings and then turn off everything else, then just tell them that this is what I'm going to do. Make sure you have the same name, consistent name, and don't change anything. Once they understand that, kind of like how things are doing, next time when they receive your file, tell them that this is what I'm going to do. If this is important to you, then just put it inside that work set, and then when they receive it, it becomes consistent, like all over the place. So you not have to deal with, oh, what's missing in their work set. Now, if they do make a mistake, it's their responsibility to clean it out. So for us, we are responsible for our work. So everybody should be playing nice. So this is why work set becomes very, very important in this particular case. Any cases. Now, that's the good thing about this, is because you can say, okay, editable. You can say, no, I do not want to edit this, right? Or you can say close. Sorry, you can say close, not open. Now, this will help you run Revit faster. So most cases, I would typically say, if you want to open that, just say no. Then that thing it's not going to load into the Revit memory. Okay. Most cases, I say, like, some of the stuff you do not want to use, then just shut it off. All right. Okay. Any questions so far? Pretty self-explanatory, sort of. Yeah, I know.
What would you usually put on a work set? Like, for example, interior.
Yes.
Or like, would you put like grids and stuff on work set?
Okay, so for grids, yeah, that's the thing. It's kind of like, for me, if I wanted to do interior design, I would put it its own work set. Now, it depends on what kind of work set. I usually have two interior work set. One is for the suite, and one is for the common corridor, right? Most cases, the suite is you're going to have one level, right? Whereas the corridor is going to be multiple levels, because when you cut a section, you're going to cut through a corridor. So I would typically put in one separation. So the suite is only going to be within that level so that you don't get replicated everywhere. The corridor is going to be in one work set, so it's going to be the common one so that it gets replicated. Like, let's say you're working on a tower, then it's going to get replicated all of the levels, whereas the suite only for that particular level. For grids, if it's under structure, if they have a work set, then I would follow them, because they're the one who actually dictate where this column is going to move. Now, by default work set, they usually have the shared level and grids. I just say, okay, all my grids and stuff like that, just put it in there, right? If structural has their own way, I would follow theirs. Okay, same work set, so that you guys have the same thing. Work set 1 is kind of like, AutoCAD terms of layer 0. Work set 1 is just anything goes. I would never use it, because it's a very how should I say, it's more like it's a useless kind of a thing. People just put it in there so that you can actually rename it and do whatever you want with it. But the unfortunate thing about it is that whenever you receive files from consultant, Workset 1 will always appear everywhere. So it's nothing you can change, right? It's layer 0. Yes, and then the share level on grids is the same thing. It's another of their def points, or layer 0. I'll just leave it alone, right? And I would not use it. But if you constantly putting in Workset 1, that's fine. But once you get to more of a coordination where a lot of details need to be coordinated and stuff like that, information, then you have to start thinking about breaking it up into pieces, so that if it's interior, it's interior. If it's exterior, then you put another Workset. If it's anything related to structure, you put it under structure, or you can put in under their Workset so that they have that easy access. Other than that, I think that's pretty much it. This is something that still needs conversation, because not everybody understood what Workset does, and then nobody actually worked with consultant that use multiple different conditions. So this is where Workset becomes very, very useful in that situation. All right. So if there's no other question, yeah, we'll just end it for today, and hopefully you guys enjoy this. In this particular one, I have like a very simple let's see, where is it? A very simple guide. If you want to use it, I downloaded from a website. It has Revit Pure is pretty good because it gives you like a really cheat sheet how to do it. Very, very simple. I like it. So for this particular one, I'm not going to do a whole write-up on it. It's just basically in this video, just learning how to do it and just learn a little bit of focus group, right? Filters, pamphlet. Okay, so here what you have is that Revit Pure has this all documentation about filters, how to do it. It's very simple, like what you do it, how you do it, you know, select your category. It's a very, very straightforward kind of a thing. Now, if you want to get into more complicated filters, just let me know. I'll help you out. That's basically my job, right? So if you don't understand certain things, you want to get it to work, then yeah. But this one, it's pretty good. It just tells you step by step, excuse me, how to do it, because it tells you, okay, what's the color, what you should do, you know, this view filter, etc., etc. So, all right. Yep, no problem. No problem. I guess, all right.